Well, welcome to Parable Man. I am the Parable Man, Jeremy Pierce, and I am resuming after a significant gap making videos. I have in the past done videos with more professional editing and introduction that was uh, put together by people who know how to do video editing, using some music of mine from my youth, and uh, and so on with tried with other things, and I kind of gave up on it. Most of my videos in the past have been with conversations with other people, other scholars, or people who are experts in some way on something that I have some interest in, maybe some understanding of. Uh, Maybe I'll do some more of those in the future, but I've decided to start recording some videos again without all the professional level of video editing, without the introduction. I'm just going to record videos, post them, and at least people have really figured that out. But at this point, I wanted to get going and just getting some recordings going. So one of the things that's been on my mind a lot in the last few weeks, since been a few weeks since the death of Charlie Kirk. As a race scholar, I wanted to record some reflections on what I see going on with race discussions regarding Charlie Kirk. So what is that going to involve? I want to look at things that Charlie Kirk said about race. I want to analyze what he actually is saying and what's motivating him in saying. I want to try to understand him and the viewpoint that's coming forward from him, and what moral concerns are motivating it, because in every single case there is a moral concern that is motivating. I also disagree with him on several of the things that he does say, and I want to look at some of the reasoning that goes in the other direction against him. I also want to look at the response to him, how people have posted memes and misquotes of him and taking him out of context. People done fact checks, and the fact checks sometimes get it wrong, and so on. All kinds of things that are really revealing and interesting about this current moment. Uh, some of it is just revealing their ignorance about the other side and what the other side believes, because they see something the thing that they're saying it's meaning. Sometimes all it takes is reading it in context to see that. Sometimes it takes understanding the other side and knowing why the other side says what they say. And we just don't do enough of that for that to be something that really happens. And so that's part of what I want to look at as well today. So I've got, I think, 5 or 6 bits of things that people have been commenting on, quotes or um, sets of quotes. Sometimes it's over a cross of time, but it's a similar kind of quote, similar kind of thing that he's being quoted as saying or misquoted as saying. And so I just want to jump in. I might have some reflections at the end. I haven't scripted any of this out. I'm just going to go through these things in order, and then may have some final thoughts at the end. But I'm going to save larger conclusions for sure until as I move through it a little bit more. And I just want to start looking at particular things. So I'm going to share my web browser rather than, again, not doing this anywhere near as professionally as I could. But I think it's helpful to at least have the thing in front of us. So I'm going to do that with uh, sharing my screen with my web browser. So what I have in front of us here is a Snopes evaluation. I just Googled a bunch of things, found some stuff, looked at the ones that actually had context. And that's what we're going to be looking at. So one of the things that Charlie Kirk said is something along the lines of Jewish money was ruining US culture. Although, as we look at what he's actually saying here, we're going to see that's not quite what he's saying. Um, so here's one of the things. This happened not long after the Hamas attacks on Israel that initiated the current conflict that's been going on between Israel and Hamas. So here's one quote. Jewish donors have been the number one funding mechanism of radical open border neoliberal quasi-Marxist policies, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. This is a beast created by secular Jews, and now they're coming for Jews. And they're like, what on earth happened? And it's not just the colleges, it's the nonprofits, it's the movies, it's Hollywood, it's all of that. All right, so what is he saying here? There are secular Jews, and they are doing things that he's characterizing as coming from a certain ideology. And he's also characterizing as coming for Jews. All right. So does that sound like he's saying that Jews are corrupting American culture in some way, or there's some insidious Jewish plot to undermine America? It doesn't sound like it to me. It sounds like what he's saying is there are voices among Jews, particularly secular ones, that are doing things that are harmful to Jews. And it looks like it's an ideology that's behind with this. He's pointing to neoliberal quasi-Marxist. Well, those are two different things, but he's lumping them together. Cultural institutions, nonprofits, open border is part of it. Secular Jews are at least some of the voices in the movement he's talking about here, and they're coming for Jews. He's including colleges, nonprofits, movies, Hollywood, all of it, right? Now, that language sounds like a conspiracy theory, a real conspiracy theory that's actually out there. There are people who believe that there's a Jewish conspiracy to undermine America and take over things and so on. And it's some of the same anti-Semitic stuff that goes with. Is that what he's saying here? Well, let's look on and see what he says in another quote. Jews have been some of the larger funders of cultural Marxist ideas and supporters of those ideas over the last 30 or 40 years. Until you cleanse that ideology from the hierarchy and the academic elite of the West, there will not be a safe future. I'm not going to say Israel won't exist, but Israel will be in jeopardy as long as the Western children, children of the West, are being taught with primarily Jewish dollars subsidizing it to view everything through oppression or oppressor case for Israel because they view Israel as an oppressor. What is he saying? Well, there's a viewpoint that he's identifying here as cultural Marxism. The viewpoint that he's talking about is sometimes referred to by practitioners of this viewpoint, people who hold it, as critical social theory or critical social justice or critical theory. It goes back to its ancestors in um, a view called critical theory, where the C and the T were always capitalized. Critical theory with capital C, capital T refers to a particular period of time in the history of European philosophy. Round about 100 years ago or so, there were a bunch of philosophers who took an idea in Marx and they applied it to other things. Marx has an idea about class, where there's the oppressor and the oppressed. The oppressor is the capitalist, and the oppressed is the worker. The capitalist being the business owner. And that oppressor-oppressed dynamic becomes the only thing that matters, the only cause that matters. In Marx's view, race is irrelevant, gender is irrelevant, only class. What these thinkers did, the people who called themselves doing critical theory, what they did is they applied that oppressor dynamic to other classifications. So one of those classifications would be race. So in the view of critical theory, the classic critical theory, you would then see that there's an oppressor-oppressor dynamic on race lines. Then you would apply it to sex or gender, and you'd see an oppressor-oppressed dynamic and so on. That idea has come through transformations. The critical theory view had some origins in Marx and previously in Hegel. The postmodern view in its relativism has largely been rejected in academia. No one is a postmodernist anymore. There are a few holdovers, but it's not the dominant view anymore. It was for a while, especially in continental philosophy and in non-philosophy departments that do theory, like English and social theory in other places. But analytic philosophers always resisted it, which is the tradition I come from. Um, the Anglo-American, English-speaking tradition of philosophy is the analytic tradition that always resisted this. It's mostly French and German and other European languages that this stuff was done in, and I know about it, but it's not my area of philosophy for sure. So, but in any case, postmodern has largely been rejected. People have seen there is an objective right and wrong. You can't have a meta narrative, as they call it, a story about the story, if you deny that there are such things as meta narratives. And yet their whole postmodern view was a meta narrative. That's the thing. So the whole thing unfolded and collapsed because people realized it didn't work. They didn't have any ability to actually criticize um, the say the bullying of gay children or something, because that they have their narrative, we have our narrative, right? Relativism just doesn't work. So what they ended up doing is trying to capture pieces of that, and some of that came through from the original critical theory, the oppressor-oppressed dynamic, and in the critical social justice view, that sort of dynamic becomes an absolute. So, for example, let's just focus on race. Since white people have historically been the oppressor uh, culture to groups of color, and in the United States, especially to Native Americans and Black Americans, uh, those categories are then the oppressed. And you could never analyze things in the other direction, even in a tiny bit, because you absolutize this stuff. So it can't be that in a small area, academia say, right, white people have anything that goes against them, because in the larger culture, it's the other direction, and so there can't be anyone who's racist against white people, right? That you may have heard that sort of line of our argument. That comes right out of the critical theory oppressor and oppressed categories are absolutized. That's certainly present in the way that some of these people talk and do these things today. And that's the kind of thing that the anti-woke kind of responses like Matt Walsh or Trump or uh, Charlie Kirk are coming from. So it's a backlash against an absolutizing of the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. They're pointing to the stuff that comes out of this critical theory tradition. And some of the critical theorists called themselves cultural Marxists because they were taking a Marxist idea and applying it to other kinds of cultural traits besides just class. Marx was absolutist about class and thought the other stuff was totally irrelevant. So, I mean, that's good grounds right already there for saying that anyone who calls this stuff Marxist is wrong. They're inaccurate. The critical theory view is not Marxist. It's a development of one idea from Marx and applying it to a bunch of other things. So, but some people have thought the term cultural Marxism makes sense there, and they've used that term. But here's one of the problems with it. Number one, hardly anyone who holds the view today identifies as that term. I'm not a big fan of using terminology that the people who hold the view don't apply to themselves. So to take a view that more people are familiar with, I'm not a fan of calling people who call themselves pro-choice pro-abortion. They're not pro-abortion in their view. They don't believe that we should have as many abortions as we can. They just think that it's the choice of a woman whether she should have an abortion, right? Stigmatizing in some cases choice. Whereas on the other side, they call themselves pro-life. They don't call themselves anti-abortion. Is it accurate that they're anti-abortion? Absolutely. They're opposed to abortion. There's no question about that. But the term that they choose for themselves is pro-life. There are people who don't like that because, well, people on the other side like life, okay, but people on the pro-life side like choice. They're fully in favor of autonomy. They just don't think that that should be that I have autonomy over any other human being. And just because in the case of pregnancy, that's someone who's inside of you, doesn't mean that the choice thing wins out over life. The life thing wins, right? And whereas the people on the other side will say, no, well, the choice right? So I think those terms appreciate and approve of. So I prefer using the terms that they self-ascribe. In that particular case, I think it makes sense. And it's a general principle I think is a good idea. I don't think we should start labeling people with names of views that they don't have. And there's lots of cases I see this happening. Um, I could go on to lots of tangents. I'm not going to. I gave one example to illustrate it, and I'll leave it at that. But it remains true that no one calls themselves cultural Marxists. It's not a view that I therefore would endorse using. But there's also this dark history to its use. As I said, some of the people in the critical theory framework were Jewish, and not all of them. As I said, some of them are Nazis. There's some of the people who were influenced by that actually went on and were part of the Hitler regime. And that's kind of an embarrassment to some of the people who like that tradition. But nevertheless, it's true. There were people who came out of that tradition who fully were on board with what Hitler was doing, which is kind of amazing, given some of the things that that tradition was all for, because it's contradictory to it, actually. But nevertheless, it happened. Um, but the majority of them, that's not so. The majority of them, there was a uh, uh, opposition to oppressor stuff, stuff they were classifying as oppressor, and they would have seen just about most of them, I think, would have seen the Nazi regime as exhibiting that oppressor dynamic. So um, a number of the people were Jewish. They have um, uh, criticisms. They offered criticisms of Western culture. That is certainly true, and they made a case that a lot of aspects of Western culture are oppressive. Now, the use of the terminology oppression here is a systemic notion of oppression that was not always deliberate, trying to do harm to people, I guess is a good way to put it. Their notion of oppression is that when circumstances affect a group of people in a way that diminishes their ability to engage in their living their life in an autonomous way or make their own choices to have the same options as other people and so on, that counts as oppression. So that notion has come down to us. We still have people who, who think of oppression in that way. Microaggressions are an example of oppression. Now, there are many people who have trouble hearing that. They think, well, microaggressions are so minor and tiny, right? How do they count as oppression? I think of someone being locked to prison or being tortured as oppression, right? Not microaggressions. It's insulting. It's it's not very understanding of people to engage in microaggressions, but is it oppression, right? But when you're thinking from a systemic notion of oppression, that oppression is structures that are in place that have an effect on a large scale so that people in a particular group are brought down or brought to margins. That's kind of how they're thinking of the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. So that's what this theory is all about, the view that he's calling cultural Marxism. But here's the dark side of this. There was an actual conspiracy theory that existed for a particularly lengthy period of time that attributed cultural Marxism to Jews and tied it all through an actual conspiracy theory. The Jews had this plan, the master plan that they were going to try to tear down Western society, and they were the enemies of the West, the enemies of the United States, and uh, it 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 it's far enough in the past that I think a lot of people don't know this, and it also was in fringe group, right? and it was talking about a not very well known and understood academic perspective that didn't really filter down into the general public for decades, really. And so this is not something that a lot of people are even aware of. But what Snopes says here is exactly right. Um, cultural Marxism has long been an anti-Semitic trope used by, well, here's where they're not right, used by white evangelicals and Christian nationalists. No, cultural Marxism has long been an anti-Semitic trope used by people on the extreme fringes, anti-Semitic circles, not mainstream white evangelicals and Christian nationals, white evangelical, not mainstream white evangelicals. That's a mistake. That's only in recent years have white evangelicals been in larger numbers gravitating toward something that looks a little bit like Christian nationalism. The real hardcore people in this fringe extreme group are not actually Christians. They're secularists. They're neo Nazis. And have they been able to convince some people who have the dressings of Christianity to them? Sure. And have they gotten relatively uh, uninformed people within white evangelicalism on board with a few of the things that they believe? Yes, they have. But the anti-Semitic trope itself is not coming out of white evangelicals. It's not even coming out of Christian nationalists. It's coming out of a hardcore anti-Semitism among the secular far right, the people that we used to call the alt-right. Now they're calling themselves the dissident right. But it's the same group. It's the same people as the alt-right. Uh, and you're just starting to see them being able to make inroads into more mainstream stuff since the first Trump administration. So I'm not entirely in agreement with what they say here. But yes, there is this anti-Semitic trope that's long-standing. It's not a new thing. And the implication of this ideology is a Jewish conspiracy designed to undermine Western values, um, not US Christian values, but Western values in general, which had an influence from Christianity. But the conspiracy theory itself is framed in a secular way traditionally. Um, now, there are many evangelicals in the US who support Israel because of the theological belief that Jews must own the land of Israel in order to facilitate the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's from a view called dispensationalism. It is very popular among Southern Baptists. It is a new view at the very end of the 19th century. It did not exist before that in the entire history of Christianity. Um, um, Darby and his dispensationalism took hold among Southern Baptists and almost no one else. There are versions of it that uh, um, occur throughout modern evangelicalism. Some of the churches that I grew up in hold to dispensationalism in some form or other. Um, my father did not and taught us otherwise, but that was it was in the circles that I was running in. And I think it's a false view. I think it's a new innovation in theological views as of the very late 19th century. But yes, that is a view that is out there. Evangelicals in the US support Israel often because of the theological belief that Jews must own the land of Israel in order to facilitate the second coming of Christ. I think that's an accurate statement about many evangelicals in the US. Now, what does that have to do with cultural Marxism or the conspiracy theory? I don't know. Why do they put that sentence there? I don't know. But they're trying to provide some background behind what he's saying, I think. Um, but what's he saying? So let's go back to these statements again. Let's look at them in the light of all of this. Okay. All right, so here we go. So here's the first of the two clips again. So he's saying Jewish donors have been the number one funding mechanism of radical, open border, neoliberal, quasi Marxist policies, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. nonprofits. This is a beast created. It's not just the colleges, the nonprofits, the movies, Hollywood. It's all of it. So he thinks there's this whole um, viewpoint that I've been talking about here. This the contemporary critical theory, critical social justice stuff that he's in the other quote calls cultural Marxism. That is present in colleges, it's present in nonprofits, it's present in movies, it's present in Hollywood, it's present in all of it. Is he right about that? He sure is. that that perspective has influenced a large number of people, a large number of academics, a large number of people in big business, in nonprofits, in Hollywood. Sure, he's right. That perspective has certainly influenced all of that. Uh, have Jewish donors had some role in that? Maybe. How much is it coming from the fact that it's Jewish money? Nothing. That's irrelevant. It's the ideas that are having an influence, not who's paying for it. But why is he saying this? Well, what he's saying is these secular Jews who hold these perspectives are having viewpoints that are making Israel seem like the oppressor. And so it's Jewish money attacks on Jews from the left. That's what he's saying. Is he saying here's this conspiracy theory that it's not clear to me that that's what he's saying. That there's this Jewish agenda to try to undermine the West. I don't think that's what he's saying here. I think what he's saying is there is this perspective he disagrees with. It's taken hold in a lot of institutions, and he's saying that a lot of it is coming from Jewish money that is actually undermining Israel. It seems to me to be an accurate claim. Other than how much of it might be coming from Jewish money, I don't know. I don't know how much of that is accurate, but what he's saying here does not seem to me to be that conspiracy theory that people have historically held about the Jewish agenda and undermining the West. I don't think that's what he's saying. Is it similar to it in its language? Yes. Did he do a good job of trying to distinguish what he's saying from that thing? No, and that is very unwise of him if he really doesn't want to be confused with that. Uh, should he have been aware that this is a thing in order to try to avoid it? Well, I think he has a responsibility to be aware of it and not to say the things that sound like that. I think that's a really important point, actually. This is people like to talk about how he was this great um, arguer. And well, he honestly, I will see this in all of these clips. He's just not. He unfortunately made a lot of mistakes in how he talked about things, and confused things and confused people who thought he was saying something that he wasn't saying. And this seems to me to be one of those examples. So I think Snopes got it wrong. I think they misevaluated it. I think just saying it as true, rating it purely as true, I think is misunderstanding what's going on and what he's saying, because the thing is being presented as if he's holding this conspiracy theory that it doesn't seem to me that he's actually holding. That doesn't mean there aren't some things you could say against what he's saying. There certainly are, and I've just said a bunch of things against what he's saying and how he said it and so on. But I think it's I think this is a I would have rated this one mixed.